Today on Sekulow, the global implications of the Biden administration with our senior counsel for Global Affairs, Mike Pompeo.
Live from Washington, D.C., Jay Sekulow Live. Phone lines are open for your questions right now. Call 1-800-684-3110. That's 1-800-684-3110. And now, your host, Jordan Sekulow.
So what are the global implications of the Biden administration? We're going to talk about that in an encore presentation of a broadcast with senior counsel for Global Affairs, former U.S. Secretary of State, former U.S. CIA Director, Mike Pompeo, now a senior counsel for Global Affairs at the American Center for Law and Justice. He has joined the ACLJ team. It's why we're putting together this encore show for you today, because many of you could have missed. That was one broadcast where we announced that. And we've had Secretary Pompeo on a number of times to talk about issues, but you may have forgotten why we have brought him on as just someone who joins the broadcast as a guest, but as someone who is now part of the ACLJ team. And I want to go to Than Bennett in Washington, D.C., because Than, reason why we put these shows back together for people is to get them up to speed on the growth of the ACLJ and the strategic individuals we've been able to bring in to our team and our organization.
And we definitely made an emphasis and a focus, Jordan, on adding in the foreign affairs space. And we did that intentionally because, as many of our listeners are going to know, every president sort of has maximum authority in that foreign affairs space. Of course, it's not unlimited. It's not unchecked. But there's more latitude around the world than there is domestically because of the goal of having America speak with one voice around the world. And the other thing is, Jordan, this is probably the policy area where you're going to see the starkest difference between the previous Trump administration and the current Biden administration. You know, we're going from a series and an administration of 4 years where American strength and American leadership around the world was really what the president was pursuing and what Secretary Pompeo, now part of our team, they were pursuing. Jordan, now we're having a return to the Obama administration policy of appeasement around the world. So there's going to be a dramatic shift. And this is why, Jordan, we've not only stocked up our team at the ACLJ, but all those years ago, this is also why we pursued accreditation at international bodies. So in this foreign affairs space, we could make a difference whether we were on the same page with the current American administration or whether, like now, we might have concerns about where it's going. We were looking forward to this many years ago, Jordan.
Let me tell you something, folks. You're going to get deep into, this is just on this broadcast, the threats our country's facing in the years ahead because of the change in the Biden administration. You're going to be learning about this directly from Secretary of State Pompeo, who also led the CIA, so he was our nation's top diplomat, and also led the Central Intelligence Agencies. I mean, so again, what's facing us? But so we all need to get up to speed on that. If you missed a broadcast, this is the way you can do it. We really get into, again, how the work of the ACLJ, whether we're speaking out in media, whether we're interacting with Congress, whether we're at the UN, as it was last week, we showed you, and that's up at aclj.org. You can see me, because we had to do it again digitally, because we couldn't be in Geneva, but they were still hosting those groups. We were allowed to make those remarks to the entire UN Human Rights Council on the violence in Nigeria against Christians. You can see that at aclj.org. But it's a way to see that how all of this different work that we do, whether it's through the broadcast, whether it's the policy, whether it's the law, whether it's the advocacy, whether it's the international work, it's crucial in this new administration to fight back for our liberty, fight back for our rights and good policies. We're already starting to see some positive results of our work, and we'll be talking about it with Secretary Pompeo. Let me remind you that this is a perfect month. Today's perfect too, to donate to the ACLJ because we have a matching challenge. You may say, Jordan, I've heard you say that before. Let me explain what a matching challenge is, because it goes through the entire month of March. A matching challenge is when we have a group of donors who are regular donors to ACLJ, and they say, we want to give you a boost month. So let your donors know, let people who might donate know that we're here, and we've already committed to matching every single one of the new donations that come through in the month of March. So if you donate right now $45 to the ACLJ, just throwing out a number, what is that like? Well, you're charged $45. It's a tax-deductible donation. But one of those matching donors donates $45. So what does that mean? Your action is the reason why the ACLJ didn't just receive $45, but $90. So you see how quickly you can double the impact of your donation by donating today during our Matching Challenge month of March at aclj.org.
Joining us now to talk about foreign policy now and in the future, the Secretary of State of the United States, Mike Pompeo.
This is a day and age, a different United States of America foreign policy.
Well, Mike Pompeo said the policies of the previous administration really brought havoc to the region.
Joining me right now with his reaction and the state of affairs right now between the U.S. and China is U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo.
China's entry into Iran will destabilize the Middle East. It'll put Israel at risk. What we've attempted to do is make clear to China, if you want to participate on the world stage, you can't engage in behavior like this.
Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is urging Turkey to release detained American pastor Andrew Brunson.
This morning, Pastor Andrew Brunson, who was imprisoned in Turkey for nearly 2 years, has been let out of jail.
The ACLJ was at the very center of making the world aware of the plight of Pastor Brunson. They raised awareness of this, and then the administration took this very seriously. In my time in service, both as the CIA Director and as Secretary of State, I watched the good work that the ACLJ was doing here in the States and all across the world.
This is a moment in the history of the American Center for Law and Justice. Secretary Pompeo has had an incredible career already, serving in Congress, was the director of the CIA, and of course, most recently, the Secretary of State for the United States of America.
The work that we do with this current administration will save lives and protect America and keep us free and safe and strong.
Well, I'm very happy to announce that former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is now a senior counsel for Global Affairs for the American Center for Law and Justice.
The ACLJ today is needed now more than ever, and it's why I am so thrilled to be a part of this really important organization.
And welcome back to Sekulow. As we told you in the first segment of the broadcast, we have a very special announcement. We announced who that is, former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. He is joining us in studio today on Sekulow. He's with us and with the team. It is great to have Secretary Pompeo. He is going to serve as the ACLJ's senior counsel for Global Affairs. Secretary Pompeo, thank you for joining us today.
Oh my goodness, it's great to be with you. It's great to be with you today, and it's great to be part of the team as well.
Well, listen, we're thrilled to have you, and I want to start to get right into this because I think it's important for our audience. Obviously, with your most recent experience, I mean, you served as CIA director also, of course, and I remember you as a congressman. But as Secretary of State, I want to get into kind of globally how you, obviously there's a shift in policy now. We know that shift's going to be real. We know that there's going to be implications. How do you see if you're looking at a world map right now, what do you see?
So the biggest challenge that our kids and our grandkids are going to change undoubtedly comes from the Chinese Communist Party. It is a atheist, Marxist-Leninist, communist organization. We know, right? We know how these work, right? We know what it means for people of faith. We know what it means to ordinary people who just want to live their lives. And then we now know what it is their intentions are for the world, the threat that it poses to the United States of America. We can never forget the challenges from counterterrorism. It's now 20 years on from 9/11. Yep. But make no mistake about it, the Middle East is still a place where you have an Iranian regime, a theocratic, kleptocratic regime and leaders. And they, too, view the United States as the great Satan and haven't given up on the fact that they may be able to roll this administration.
I want to go back to the situation with China for a moment and talk about that because it's not just, we look at, when we're dealing with legal issues, sometimes I'll call on the international stage especially, I'll say we're engaged in lawfare. You got these regimes utilizing the usually international tribunals to get their way. And it's a form of warfare, but it's without bullets. It's in the legal process. The Chinese, the threat to me, as looking at it, is you've got both an economic threat and then the political threat. And then there's kind of the global aspect of that is their desire, and they've been always very clear about this, is they want control.
Yeah. No, we should never forget. So the economic piece of this has an enormous national security implication because it turns on the most capable high-end technologies that the world knows, whether it's artificial intelligence or machine learning. And we've made this enormous mistake. We've allowed them to come steal it from us. And we've invited them into our universities. We've invited them into our research institutions. We've provided U.S. taxpayer money to underwrite this research, and we've allowed them to be in places we should have never let them be in. They've used it to their advantage. And to your point about the legal system, they've pretended to comply with these legal things around the world and claim that they're a nation that wants to be part of a normal civilized world, while all the while benefiting from an unequal set of rules. And the good thing about our administration is we didn't let that happen. Every place we confronted them, every place we encountered them, we demanded that they be fair and reciprocal and they behave in a way that normal nations behave.
Yeah, I think staying on China is good right now. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so this is obviously everybody is focused on China. I mean, still with COVID, we see that the Biden administration rushed to join the World Health Organization. We had the one American on the panel said we should just blindly accept their finding. But the American intelligence, even under the Biden administration, who joined the WHO, has said what they put out in April is still the statement from the U.S. government, even from Trump to Biden, and that is that they are still assessing and figuring out whether or not this was something that was done at that Wuhan Institute, which, by the way, we all learned receives U.S. funding and is still the Biden administration has not canceled that funding that they could be getting, and you can make a case for why maybe in the past. But now in the future, it's tough to make that case. But I mean, those threats too, people still wonder how much, because they destroy all the evidence. They make themselves look guilty, and even whether they are or not, right. When you destroy all the evidence and then let the inspectors go in, it's pretty tough to come out. And our intelligence community will not go by what the WHO said.
Yeah. So there's three things we know for sure about this virus with respect to China. First, that's where it began. It is, in fact, the Wuhan virus. This is indisputable, in spite of enormous propaganda where the Chinese have tried to foist it on America, saying this came from frozen foods or from America's laboratories. This is just nonsense and propaganda. Second thing we know, immediately, the Chinese Communist Party knew an awful lot and refused to share that information with the world. Right? Your responsibility as a global player says if you've got a problem, you make sure and keep everyone safe. They didn't. They closed down travel inside of China, but allowed people to travel to Milan and all across the world, spreading this virus. And they knew better. They knew that human-to-human transmission was taking place. Finally, we know they operated this lab. And we know that they were engaged in research on these kinds of viruses. And we know that they've had trouble securing viruses in their labs before. In 2003, we know they leaked with respect to SARS. So they are not world-class when it comes to securing viruses in their laboratories. Now, there's a handful more pieces of evidence, too. I wish that the Chinese Communist Party was capable of sharing this information in the world, but you all know this, right? Just like with Chernobyl, just like with communist regimes all along, they close down, they disappear people who have the information that could help the world solve this serious problem.
You know, one of the things I said about the Chinese in relation to the virus was, whether it was intentional or not, the actions they took afterwards failed, as you said, to live up to international obligations. And yet they almost get away with it with impunity. I mean, not when you all weren't there, but now it just seems like it's go along, get along. I know there's still policies out there, but going back just to the kind of the bravado that China uses in their language, both in the language that they're using and in the challenges for our audience around the country, how would you, if you were on a scale of 1 to 10, would you, 10 being the highest threat, where are they?
You know, I'd put it at a 9 or a 10. Okay. It is something that and importantly, something we're going to have to confront for a while. It needs to be a sustained effort. We need to educate people. You know, I'll give you another example that everyone, I think, that's listening can understand. You'll see Chinese officials showing up at school board meetings all across America. You'll see them at PTA meetings. They're not coming there because they're good citizens of the community. They're coming there because they're attempting to educate you about what they want to do and how they want to undermine American democracy. This is a serious threat. Everyone needs to be aware of it. And we need to be mindful that they are serious about undermining our way of life here in the United States.
With some of the young kids, these Confucius institutes that we're hearing about that are all over the United States, they're trying to say, oh, this is just part of an education program. And people are seeing it. Like you said, it's in a lot of public schools across the country, wherever you are. It doesn't matter if you're on the coast or in middle America. And so they're in our schools. We're economically relying on them. And when something bad happens, we don't know if they intentionally did it, unintentionally did it, but they won't really get us the truth. I mean, that's a pretty tough diplomatic situation.
This is the conundrum. You add now that they conduct more missile tests than the rest of the world combined, their enormous nuclear power, have a military that is expanding throughout the East China and South China Sea and wants to be able to control all the main waterways of the world. And you have a full throttle challenge to the way of life that we have here in the United States of America.
You know, the president President Trump got a lot of flack for America First. A lot of flack. And, of course, I think it was a fantastic policy. But the Chinese have no hesitation, the communist regime, of saying China first.
Oh, goodness, no. Absolutely. In everything. And they're pretty audacious. They'll talk about China first, but they'll say, we want these deals to be win-win. This is their language. It's a win-win. I haven't seen a deal America cut for 50 years that was win-win.
And you're dealing with them, because I know that they've got, it's very, obviously very centralized in the control factor. Was there a sense, because when you were Secretary of State, President Trump was in office, and you had the whole apparatus of government following our policies, I felt like the Chinese, other than putting the virus aside, were pretty much being checkmated. I mean, that there was a serious check on the Chinese. They knew you all were tough for the country and putting our interests first. And what was the sense globally with our other partners with the Chinese? In other words, the other countries you had to deal with that are our allies.
Yeah.
Did they see it?
They did. They did in large part because we put it in front of them.
Yeah.
So I spent a lot of my time. I'll never forget my first trip as Secretary of State, where I traveled to Europe and was talking about the threat at this time from a particular technology from Huawei. They didn't want to believe it because it's hard. They were making money off of this. In the same way the United States was. They now have come to see it. What they need to know is that the Americans will be with them and that we'll have their back and we'll support them, whether that's the Australians, the Japanese, the Indians, the South Koreans. They know the challenge is before them. They need a strong America that understands America first, prepared to be their partner.
Do you think that the current administration, and I know it's very early, have you seen any sense of where that policy is going to be?
It's been a bit of a hodgepodge in terms of their statements. But in the end, Jay, it's not about their statements, it's about the actions. You have to be prepared to take serious actions to confront China in a serious way. There will be costs associated with that.
Yeah.
The Chinese will respond, but you have to be ready to walk through that fire and get it right.
You know, we didn't even get a chance to talk about the threat to religious minorities there, Christians,
Sure,
and others. I mean, it's not just Christians, but that is also a real threat in China.
It is. My next to last day in office, I made a declaration which is unusual. I declared that there was genocide taking place. That was intentional. It was accurate. It was factually based. And it tells you the horrors that are taking place to religious minorities in that part of the country. It doesn't begin to address the ones that are happening all across China.
We come back. Secretary Pompeo continues to join us. If you're just joining us if you're listening, if you're watching, however you are taking in this broadcast, let me encourage you to share it with your friends and family. But also, I'll let you know this won't be the last time Secretary Pompeo joins us, but he has now joined the ACLJ as a senior counsel for Global Affairs. So you'll see him a couple times a week at least, maybe more when necessary on our broadcast. And then, of course, there'll be all the work he'll be doing behind the scenes with the ACLJ team, both domestically and internationally. Because I like to point out, too, his tenure as CA director. We will be right back on Sekulow.
Tensions are heightened in the Middle East.
Iran shooting off its own missiles in a drill in the country's desert, capable of hitting U.S. bases in the region.
The president has said that if Tehran resumes strict compliance with the 2015 nuclear agreement, the U.S. would rejoin as a starting point for future negotiations.
This is a Biden administration that is saying, Iran, we're going to lift economic sanctions, we're going to rejoin the nuclear deal. So you would think if they thought that the Biden administration approach was the correct approach, rushed right back into the failed Iran nuclear deal, and Iran will suddenly be nice. And yet, it's the opposite.
Iran also informed the UN it would begin enriching uranium to 20% at its Fordo facility. That puts Iran one step away from creating weapons-grade uranium.
The Iranians are desperate, but they know how to negotiate from a position of strength, and that's exactly what they're doing.
The Biden team will build up consensus as an amazing initiative and an amazing word. But consensus at the UN means that you have 15 members of the UN Security Council agreeing to a statement or a policy position. This is really dangerous for America.
You can't just jump back into the JCPOA. We have to look at every legal option to defend our own interests.
The real danger of Biden, I think, is the international level.
Yep.
Because that's where he has the most power to act, where Congress can't step in.
America first, the things that we have seen like that, I fear, and I'm very apprehensive as to whether this administration coming in is going to be able to continue that legacy.
And now we're going to take all these steps back with the same retread bureaucrats that are going to go with their anti-Israel policies to the United Nations, and we're going to have to fight like crazy. This is why your support of the American Center for Law and Justice and our offices around the globe is so essential right now.
So just in case you missed it today, I want to make sure you understand we have a big announcement at the American Center for Law and Justice. As you know, we've been building out our foreign affairs, national security team at the ACLJ. And today we can announce, if you didn't catch it earlier in the broadcast, that former Secretary of State, CIA Director Mike Pompeo is joining the ACLJ as Senior Counsel for Global Affairs. He is joining us in the studio today here with us, and we've been talking about China. We've been talking about broadly kind of the threats facing the United States, the new administration, and now getting into the Middle East.
All right, I'd like to turn our attention to the Middle East. I think, obviously in the months ahead, we'll have more on China in the days ahead. But let's talk about the situation in the Middle East. Specifically, we're going to get to the Abraham Accords, but I think we have to start with the big threat. And that's been a threat that has been existing for a long time, since 1979, and that is the threat from the Islamic Republic of Iran. I have written a book on it. You were the Secretary of State dealing with it. We talked about the Chinese being a threat. Iran's and their proxies, and they have many in the Middle East, have caused havoc, continue to try to cause havoc. What's your sense of that threat?
Jay, I remember when I was a member of Congress, this is what we spend most of our time when I came on your show talking about. The risks it presented to religious freedom, and frankly, just the risk it presents to the United States. The good news is that we diminished Iran's capabilities during our 4 years. We put enormous economic pressure on them. I remember too, Jay. I remember people saying, if it's just America, this can't have any effect. Well, it was mostly just America on this issue, and we had enormous impact on the regime. We convinced Gulf states, the Israelis, that if we got this right, we could diminish the threat of terror, the threat from a nuclear weapon, and we didn't need to be part of this crazy deal that was going to create a pathway for an Iranian nuclear weapon. And we were well on our way to doing that. It looks like this administration is going to change course and underwrite this theocratic regime again. Last time they sent pallets of cash, they allowed $1.9 billion. They allowed the Iranian regime to step up its game across the world. That is bad for America. It's terrible for Israel. It's bad for the Gulf states as well. I hope this administration will understand this isn't 2015, and this is serious business for security people in Kansas, like my home state, and people all across our country.
But I know our listeners they're now concerned once again, and they weren't concerned about this under the Trump administration when you were Secretary of State and CIA Director at all. But that is Iran back now on a path, or will the Biden administration put them back on a path? It seems like, again, they're rushing. They want that face-to-face again. They want to sip tea with Zarif. They want to have that conversation. Are we putting them back on that track, and we being the United States government under the Biden administration, to like almost legally obtaining nuclear technology so they'd have the bomb?
If the last 4 years demonstrates anything, is that the Iranians respect one thing: strength. And if there's a second thing, it's that if you appease them, if you hand them money and wealth, they're going to continue to build out their capabilities. It's the wrong direction. It's the direction that, frankly, Europe had wanted to go as well. We were there standing athwart this, saying, no, we're not going to permit this to happen. And we had a real impact. We diminished the capacity of Hezbollah to threaten Israel. We diminished what was taking place in Iraq from the Shia militias. We didn't put it all to bed, but we made an awful lot of progress.
I want to talk about the proxy aspect of what the Iranians do, because when we talk about the threat in the region, in the Middle East, we talk about what Iran's up to, they use proxies, even proxies that don't necessarily share their particular brand of Islam. They will cross over, so to speak, the Sunni Shia divide because of their common interest in harming Israel. Hezbollah, Hamas, the proxy aspect of Iran and the depth of that. You saw it firsthand both in CIA and as Secretary of State.
No, I did. I saw it up close, and we made a decision early on in the administration. We made a communication to the Iranians that said, we are not going to allow you to get away with using proxies. What do we mean by that? If a Iraqi Shia militiaman underwritten by the Iranians attacks an American soldier in Iraq, we're coming to Iran to impose costs on you. That is hard to do, but we made clear that's what we're going to do. This week you saw this. You saw what looks to have been an Iranian-sponsored attack that injured an American and killed a contractor inside of Iraq. And this administration says we want to go sit at the table and talk to them. Yeah. They will interpret that as a free pass to hurt Americans.
This is all gets me back to this administration, because you joined early with the Trump administration as CA director, you're tested immediately by your adversaries, and this is what the Biden administration is facing right now. China, Iran, even at this ISIS 2.0 in North Africa, they all want to see, like, are you really going to come kill us? Are you really going to cut us off? Are you really going to, these alliances you made on these Abraham Accords, are those going to go through? Are you going to cancel the F-35s to these countries so that they kind of say, well, we're not going to be in these deals anymore. We got to figure it out for ourselves. I mean, this is all the tests that are being thrown at the Biden administration. And I just get very nervous when I see we just want to meet face to face, and John Kerry's back in the mix, and it's that same team. It's like Joe Biden just took in the B team from Obama years and put them at the A level. And that makes me very nervous, because these are the guys that wrote that JCPO. And I remember sitting in our studios going through it, and it was like, these one pagers with these bullet points, and that was agreed to. Right. It's like no one would agree to that when it comes to nuclear weapons.
Jordan, you remember it was myself and Senator Cotton who found the secret side deals that they'd entered into. It seems like a long time ago, but there were elements of that deal that they didn't even tell the American people about. Maybe there's secret side deals already. I don't know. Yeah. But we know the mindset, and that mindset is one of appeasement. And can't we all just get along? And the Iranians will never let go of their ambitions to conduct terror and to be the Middle Eastern power. The Israelis know that. The Saudis know that. The Emiratis know that. The Americans need to support those folks, making sure that we do the right things to protect and secure our freedom.
It's interesting, because I'll never forget this conversation I had with Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, not that long ago. And he kept saying, and he says this publicly, remember this. The Iranians view the Israelis as the little Satan. The big Satan is the United States. I remember during the Iranian Revolution, on the streets, the students that were involved in that, the revolutionaries actually, chanting to kill President Carter. That was their chant. So for our audience that's listening right now, they know we've been concerned about Iran. That threat has not, I think you all did a tremendous job, but that could turn around very quickly.
Oh yes, the Iranian intentions haven't changed. And in the end, it's about intention and capacity, and the intention hasn't changed one bit.
Are they, because they were diminished, how long does that diminishing hold? Or does it depend on how much money is thrown at them?
Yeah, it's all about how quickly do businesses return and prop up their economy, and how much cash do we generate them because we feel like we owe them something. This would be a tragic change in American foreign policy.
Second half hour, I want to get into the Abraham Accords. Yeah. We'll do that when we come back from the break, because that was a monumental moment in American history.
Well, this idea, too, that if we move an embassy to Jerusalem, that was going to cause the world to explode. But yet, these people, that's what makes me nervous foreign policy-wise, Secretary Pompeo, we have a minute left here, is that Joe Biden was criticized a lot by Obama officials when it came to foreign policy. And then he brought in people like John Kerry, who have been wrong, never admit that they were wrong, never will at least say, hey, I was wrong on this one. But he keeps bringing them back in. And now we've got a guy who said, this is the one guy who didn't want to go after bin Laden, didn't want to make the tough call. And that makes me nervous. It just makes me nervous. I know it makes our audience nervous. And that's why they want to be informed by people like you.
Jordan, you talked about being tested. We were tested too. Don't forget this.
Yes.
The chemical weapons were used in Syria. We said, if you do it again, we will come after you. We made a red line. We did it. Qasem Soleimani was threatening Americans. We took him out.
Yeah. It was such a difference. But we have to be ready now for, we see, it's everywhere we go. You have to see the influence of Iran back in the news right away again. So we come back. We're going to have a second half hour with Secretary Pompeo, who is now joining the ACLJ as a senior counsel for global affairs. And we want you to know this is not just for one and only time you'll see him on our broadcast. He will be joining us weekly or bi-weekly throughout the week to get into all these issues that we know are going to be facing our country. So it's great to have him as we are building out this team. And join us for our second half hour coming up on Sekulow.
Here's what I want to say to our ACLJ members, or for those of you that enjoy watching this broadcast, whether it is going after the deep state, whether it is litigation that we're engaged in, whether it is defending the persecuted church and getting individuals out of prison in other countries because of their faith, whether it's training lawyers to fight for religious liberty, not just here in the United States, but around the globe, whether it is producing a daily 1 hour live television and radio broadcast heard on thousands of radio stations, on TV platforms, on social media platforms. Your support of the ACLJ enables us to do all of this. we want to encourage you to support the work of the ACLJ. We're in a matching challenge campaign. Any amount you donate, we get a matching gift for. Go to aclj.org today. That's aclj.org.
Live from Washington, D.C., Jay Sekulow Live. Phone lines are open for your questions right now. Call 1-800-684-3110. That's 1-800-684-3110. And now, your host, Jordan Sekulow.
Thank you for joining us, folks. We want to make sure, because there are those of you that I know you're driving in your car, you may just have turned us back on, and maybe you missed the first part of the show, and you say, hey, is that Mike Pompeo I hear on Secular Radio today? It is, but more importantly, he's not just on as a guest, but he is joining the ACLJ as part of the team. Former Secretary of State, former CIA Director, and Congressman Mike Pompeo is joining the ACLJ as Senior Counsel for Global Affairs, so he'll be on the broadcast regularly, providing his insight into what is going on around the world, how it affects us domestically. So again, as you know, we've been building out this team. We added Rick Grinnell. We've added now Mike Pompeo to the ACLJ team. You're going to see, of course, through our broadcast, I think that is important. Through our broadcast, this will be the public side of what they're bringing to the table for our organization. And then there's the work that they will be able to assist with for around the world that we know we're going to be facing under the Biden administration.
Yeah, I mean, there's going to be a lot of issues. One of the things when we were talking before we went on the air, I had mentioned that when we've had issues of the persecuted church, when you were Secretary of State and President Trump was in office, we had tremendous success in getting releases. Also had a friendly audience. That unfortunately has not been the case in the past. I'll never forget this. One of our clients, Saeed Abedini, who was in jail in Iran. You remember this one?
Yes.
Got out under the Obama administration only because of the $1.9 billion. Yes. The first thing he asked me when he got free, now he's an American. He was Iranian, born in Iran. First thing he asked me when he got out is, why in the world did the United States pay $1.9 billion? Why didn't you just say he's an American and let him go? And that's I think the irony of all of this. But, we're in a new regime now, and we got to deal with those factors. But Secretary's been with us before. We should go back. And a little history here.
His time in Congress as well. He immediately was someone who was a regular on Jay Sekulow Live on the radio broadcast. This is probably back, 2012? 2012. When it was Congressman Pompeo on Jay Sekulow Live.
On the economy.
You look at the economic situation right now, and despite the fact that President Obama continues to say what a bad mess he inherited, the reality is 4 years into it, their plan has not worked. I mean, if we're just going to be blunt, the plan has not worked. How do you think this how's this playing in Kansas? I mean, basically, what is the sense you're getting from your constituents about the economic situation we find ourselves in?
Kansas has suffered just like the rest of the country has these 3.5 years. It's absolutely the case that when this president came into office, there were some real challenges. But that doesn't allow you to make it worse. That doesn't allow you to put a set of policies in place that continue to spend $1 trillion a year more than you take in, that have led to 8% unemployment for now 40-plus months consecutively.
I wanted to play that because I just wanted to show that for those that are new to our broadcast or have been listening to us for a long time, Secretary Pompeo is not a new voice in one sense, because when he was in Congress, he was often on our program and we worked very closely. And now, of course, he became the director of the CIA and then ultimately the Secretary of State. So it's great. And as we start this half of the broadcast off, welcome you here. We're thrilled you're here.
My goodness, it's wonderful. It's wonderful to still be with you. You all have been most gracious to me for my entire time in public service. And it's important work that's done here, and I'm glad to be a small part of it.
We appreciate that. When we come back from the break, we're going to get into, I want to follow up. In the first half hour, we talked about Iran and Israel. I want to get into the Abraham Accords. That was a big, big moment. The Golan Heights, another big moment. The moving of the embassy to Jerusalem. All of those very, very significant issues. We'll get into all of those.
Yeah, let me encourage people, too. If you're watching this online, if you're on Facebook, if you're on YouTube, I know we're talking to all of our 1,000+ radio stations and Sirius XM as well live. But if you're watching this, I'd encourage you, because it's unique that the Secretary of State Pompeo is in the studio with us today. So he's going to be joining us in the future. Sometimes he'll be joining by Skype and other different ways. But this is a great show to share with your friends and family. So click that share button right now. As always, go to aclj.org. There'll be new pieces up by former Secretary of State Pompeo as well, now that he is with the ACLJ as Senior Counsel for Global Affairs. So click that share button. Bring your family. Let them know about this. This is the first day we're announcing this. You're getting this news first live on the air. And as always, we encourage you to go to aclj.org. That's aclj.org. We'll be right back on Sekulow.
I was at a board meeting at Jews for Jesus, and the executive director said, we've got a case. The Supreme Court had just granted review. It was about literature distribution at airports.
We wanted to have the Bible study meet in the school, but it turned into a problem when the principal said, no, you can't have it.
I told her that I wanted to sing Noel, and she said, the principal said that we can't have anything to do with Christ in our songs.
We marched around the country defending evangelism in Chicago, in Boston, in New York, Atlanta, Texas, Southern California, Northern California, and points in between.
We got a letter one evening from the IRS saying they wanted all this information that we all knew immediately was not right.
How do you fight the government? How do you fight the IRS?
Tea Party groups say they're being targeted by the Internal Revenue Service, and they're enlisting the aid of the American Center for Law and Justice.
They were trying to shut groups down that they disagreed with. This was very, very serious.
The federal courts do not need to become monitors of state trespass actions, and that's all this is.
We were looking for the right to speak our minds and our consciences, and we won that right today.
Religious persecution is a situation where your life is literally put in jeopardy simply because of what you believe.
Can you help? Can you do something? He's on death row, and so we launched an international campaign. His freedom now rests solely on diplomatic efforts by the United States government and world leaders dedicated to human rights.
The release of Andrew Brunson. He is the American evangelical from North Carolina, held in Turkey for more than 2 years.
There was an Air Force plane that came from Germany that had been on standby. We're flying, and they finally left Turkish airspace. It's like, okay, we're really out of Turkey and free again.
Welcome back to Sekulow, and we are very, a new member of our team. That's a special guest. It's not a special guest, not a guest, a member of the team. As former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, now ACLJ Senior Counsel for Global Affairs. Dad, we've been talking about a lot of issues throughout this broadcast. If you've missed any of this broadcast, you need to go back and watch, through Facebook, through YouTube, through Rumble, through all the different ways, Periscope on Twitter, and share it with your friends and family as well, because we've covered so much in this first interview where Secretary of State Pompeo is with us in studio also, which is unique as well. But Dad, I know you want to get right into it.
I want to get into the International Criminal Court in The Hague. In future programs, we'll talk about the success of the Abraham Accords, but I want to get into the ICC issue because nobody knows the ICC more than a Secretary of State, and nobody has experienced the ICC more than a lawyer that's actually appeared before the ICC, which I have. So I was there, Mr. Secretary, in December of 2019.
Right before the first impeachment.
Right before the first impeachment, yeah. It was weeks before the first impeachment trial. I went over because the ICC had called for a general hearing on whether they could bring an action against the United States out of Afghanistan. And the United States obviously was not going to appear because the United States doesn't recognize a jurisdiction like Israel and like Russia, like China, like a number of countries. I went because our European Center for Law and Justice in Strasbourg has standing with all these international bodies, and we were able to get our legal position in. And it became a media thing because, I was the president's lawyer and I was showing up at this, and I had on the whole regalia. I mean, you wear the robe with the little kerchief and handkerchief and whatever. It was fine. And they were very polite. The decision was awful. They were polite. I'll say that. But that court has now got Israel and the United States in its crosshairs, and you've been very critical of the court, which I am too, because there is nothing about it that is either international or court.
Criminal, yes, I might say. No, that's absolutely right. Look, a lot of your listeners may just not be familiar with this. It's worth knowing that this is something that's this little body that sits in The Hague, and has tried for years and years and years to go after American soldiers who were fighting in Afghanistan, intelligence officers who were just doing their job on behalf of America, Israelis who were simply doing the things that Israel does to defend itself. We've never acknowledged that they have any authority over our people, and they still won't leave our people alone. And so our administration took this seriously. We began for the first time to sanction officials. This was, I must say, this was treated as just gauche by the rest of the world, by the Europeans, thinking, how do you sanction someone from this international criminal court? But to your point, it's not court. No, it's a bunch of countries that came together to try and solve a legitimate concern. But no country that doesn't submit to its jurisdiction should have its people at risk. A soldier who can't travel the world with his family, and so we started sanctioning people. The woman who's running the element of the ICC, Fatou Bensouda, was coming after us in a way, and so we just said no, enough, and we sanctioned her. We acknowledged that she was corrupt, that the whole institution had become politicized and corrupt. We weren't going to let them take on Americans.
We had I had a dual experience there. I represented our interests of the European Center for Law and Justice the first go-round in 2014 with the then prosecutor, different prosecutor, and he actually did not bring actions against the Israelis. Yeah. The second one, it was a lost cause. I mean, the writing was on the wall before it started. The irony of all this is the court system there would not pass municipal court rules in the United States. And as the secretary said, they go after not the state. They go after the individuals, right, including, by the way, one of our head lawyers in Israel, who also is a colonel in the Israeli Defense Force. Yeah. Intelligence. I mean, this is the way they operate.
Doesn't surprise me. This was designed to handle nations that didn't take care of bad acts that their people had done across the world. But we know Israel has a complementary system. The United States a complementary system. If one of our soldiers does something wrong, we have the UCMJ, we have our court systems. We're going to address bad acts by people who act inconsistent with the international law. It wasn't what it was designed to do. And you now have young American CIA officers and soldiers and Israeli officers across the world who are being threatened by them, and it's unacceptable.
Yeah, they're scared to go. If you want to do the lifelong trip to a place like South Africa, which is like, and so a lot of those Israelis who are
from there.
So, but if you want to go there, and they love to throw somebody from in to the ICC's jurisdiction and to the Hague. But also they became this court of, instead of doing special courts for problems when there were two failed states and a conflict, which is what they used to do, and that was much more effective, I think. They tried to make it a permanent court, and then they had to get away from, looks like we're only going after Africans and warlords because they had no legal systems and no complementary system. And so we've got to go after an American, and we've got to go after Israeli, we've got to go after Westerners. And that is their goal now, is going after Westerners, and the only Westerners really highly engaged in combat. Interestingly, they didn't want to go after the UK troops in Afghanistan or the troops in Iraq. It was all about, if we can get an American, then the world will give us legitimacy.
That's what I think it was for. That's why they were doing it.
And so
they were trying to get their version of legitimacy.
I think that's almost certainly right. We know this. We know that international law has a fundamental principle. You should only be subject to being prosecuted by a court if your nation has decided to be part of that system.
You join the Rome Statute.
You join the Rome Statute. We chose clearly not to. By the way, multiple Democrat administrations and Republican administrations both said we weren't going to be part of this. And yet they persist.
But there is talk, at least chatter, that the Biden administration may promote that. Now, I don't think that at the end, the Secretary of State now is going to be too keen on that. But I don't know.
I can't imagine it. The risk is too great to young Americans, and
because people
I can't imagine
it. It's after the individual soldier, and that's who they go after.
Absolutely. No, I can't believe that they would do that. I'd be very surprised. This has been a consistent bipartisan view that the ICC ought not to be applied against Americans. I hope that we stay in that good place.
We've talked about China. Obviously, everybody understands that threat. We've talked about Israel, the ICC. We've talked about a bit to an extent Iran. Is there a place in the world where we're kind of missing as Americans? Some of it I wonder, like North Africa, where I see ISIS kind of. These news stories start popping up about this. They use the word ISIS. I don't know if they have any form or direct, and then kind of failed states because they've had revolutions like Sudan and others where they need to get their governments up and running. They're pro-American now, but who knows if they will be, if they can stay empowered. So where else should we be looking because our audience is very informed. They care more than just what's on the news for 2 minutes. Where else should they be looking?
You mentioned Africa is a good one. We did a lot of good work there in places like Sudan and got them to recognize Israel as well. Yeah, but I'd suggest too, closer to home, we did a lot of work in Venezuela trying to help the Venezuelan people avoid the catastrophic effects of Maduro and his socialist regime. We did work with our good friends down in Brazil who are moving in the right direction to build out their market alongside the United States. There's a lot of work close to home, and certainly we talk about Mexico. The president focused a great deal on securing our borders, but that relationship with Mexico is an important one. They're on our southern border. We can't permit the cartels that are there to continue to allow drugs to come across our southern border, and I worked hard with the foreign policy apparatus inside of Mexico to do everything we could to secure that southern border, not only against people coming here illegally, but all the bad stuff that can flow across, and the terrorists who might move across that border as well.
I want to briefly go back to the Middle East because it's got to be mentioned. Under President Trump, under your leadership, Jerusalem is recognized by the United States and now other countries as the capital of Israel. Of course, the Israelis have recognized that since they've had it. So then the Golan Heights Declaration and then the Abraham Accords. Let's explain really quickly the Abraham Accords, how that came into being, because that is a phenomenal achievement.
The Abraham Accords are historic, and those countries aren't going back. This is the good news for all your listeners. This can't be undone because this is a people-driven effort that recognizes that it can't be Arab foreign policy to hate Israel. It just doesn't work. And so these nations took the big step, the bold step. Those leaders took very courageous actions to say, we want to have diplomatic relationship with Israel. We want to do business. We want to come to know these people. We have different faiths. They're a Jewish state. We are Arab, Islam nations. But we want to be their friends and partners. And it's a great historic thing. It was enabled by the fact that we took a view with respect to Iran that said we're not going to be Iran's friend. We're going to put costs on them. And then an acknowledgement that they were under threat as well. And we would help defend those countries when they were challenged.
Yeah, a historic moment. And I think long-term historic for our country and generations to come.
And it went against a lot of the now current administration, but this idea that the Kerrys of the world, the State Department kind of bureaucracy of the world is that if we don't solve the Palestinian issue first, we can never make any movements with these Gulf states. And then that argument crumbled.
It was bipartisan consensus that absent a deal between Israel and the Palestinians that you couldn't move peace forward. And President Trump and our team said nonsense, and we began to work to build it out led to the Abraham Accords. More countries will join.
Which also will mean you'll ultimately, I think, have peace with the Palestinians. Because
Absolutely.
You have no choice.
Absolutely.
And then their administrations are those administrations, we've talked about it before, are very corrupt. And
much weaker now.
But they're much weaker now. And again, big impact. Historic day here for the ACLJ.
Yeah, and I want to just let people know too the reason why we're able to keep building out the team with these kind of leaders. It started with Rick Grinnell and now with former Secretary of State Pompeo, who are just leaving and now coming to you with this information is because of your support for the ACLJ. That we could with a lot more of this broadcast. And to build out this team, it shows your trust in us with your resources. I encourage you, continue to support us at aclj.org. This is why we're able to make these moves that we're making and kind of bring this to you. So it's not on a one-time basis as an interview, but as members of our team at the American Center for Law and Justice, Dan.
Yeah, and ongoing. So it is great having you as part of the team.
Wonderful to be here. Jay, Jordan, thank you for having me on today.
It's going to be great. We'll look forward to having you in the future. And folks, again, a historic moment. We're going to be back more to wrap things up in just a moment.
Thanks to your support of the ACLJ, we have had many victories.
The IRS now formally apologizing to Tea Party groups.
The IRS did the right thing by resolving the case with an injunction that mandated a complete change of the IRS nonprofit tax-exempt work as it relates to issue advocacy organization.
If any group feels like they're being targeted, they can go to federal court and bring our case. That's a victory.
It's one of the most significant wins in the ACLJ's history, to take on the IRS and win.
For more than 27 years, the ACLJ has been fighting for freedom and liberty in the United States and around the globe.
These are young people in their 20s and 30s that are doing this. They're fighting for life at a whole new level to beat back the abortion juggernaut. We've got a whole group of young lawyers that are defending them.
Those of us that believe in life know that we're on the right side of history. We understand full well children are children, and they're precious in God's sight, and they're precious in our nation's sight, and they're precious to parents.
But I actually think we're winning this. This is one of the social issues we're winning.
The release of Andrew Brunson. He is the American evangelical from North Carolina, held in Turkey for more than 2 years.
They're rushing us to the airport, and there was an Air Force plane that came from Germany that had been on standby. We're flying, and they finally left Turkish airspace. It's like, okay, now we're really out of Turkey and free again.
We're grateful to ACLJ who put it out to these people, they were getting all this out.
All of the people who prayed for us through ACLJ and through your contacts, I'm thankful, I'm grateful, and actually I'm astounded.
We need your help as we continue this work here in the United States and around the world. Join the matching challenge today, and your tax-deductible donation will be doubled.
Hey, welcome back to Sekulow. I think this show just showed you, and having, of course, a former Secretary of State Pompeo, now a member of the ACLJ team as senior counsel for Global Affairs. We wore ties for the former Secretary of State. We don't usually do that, but again, he is just out of that role and still very much in that debriefing portion of his phase too.
Yep.
And we remember when we added Rick Riddell, he was just out of the role and still in that debriefing stage. But to have them on, to think about what we got through today, the insight we got, that you don't get on cable news. We all do a lot of interviews. So does Secretary of State Pompeo. He does a lot of those interviews too. But they're for 3 and 4, 5 minutes. You don't have a full hour to talk about them. When you get into the full hour on China, when you get into the full hour on Iran, think about what he will be providing to you as a listener. And then on top of that, think about what he's going to be providing for the ACLJ that you won't see and hear, that we can't just talk about on the air. But for you, the listener, just for you alone, I think worth it because it's going to give you insight in a longer format so you can actually get down to the issues you care about, not what the mainstream media is trying to tell you to care about that day, but what the issues are important. We talked about this rising new Islamic terror, even in North Africa. We barely just touched the surface of that today, but also got deeply into China, deeply into Iran, deeply into these UN agencies, Dad. I mean, this is, and Israel, of course. And this was just a day one introduction.
But what you're seeing, of course, on the broadcast, you get to see and get to share his insights. What Jordan was just alluding to is something I want to spend a couple minutes talking about. That is the substantive work of the American Center for Law and Justice. Our offices are literally around the globe. So as you know, we engage at the UN at the highest levels, and it's not easy. It's a hostile work environment, so to speak. It's usually hostile. But we've had great success also. But can you imagine now if you're in our position as the lawyers that run this, Jordan and I, and our team? I mean, Andy Economo, Harry Hutchison, Wes Smith, Skip Ash. I mean, people you see on this broadcast, they do this broadcast, but they're writing, they're drafting, they're negotiating all the time, doing legal work. But can you imagine now what's happened for us? That when we've got an issue that we're dealing with for Israel, let's say, and there's an issue with another country, that we can go to our senior counsel for global affairs, who happens to be the former Secretary of State for the United States of America. Now, that is substantively for us, and that's what I want to share for a moment. Substantively for us, that's very important. Not the first member of the cabinet that we've had on our team, John Ashcroft, all the way back in 2005, and then who was a former Attorney General under George W. Bush, and was, of course, the Attorney General during 9/11. And then Rick Grinnell, former acting director of national intelligence, ambassador to Germany, and now, of course, the Secretary of State. But also understand, substantively, it gives us a lot of depth.
It does give us a lot of depth. So it's more than just what you're going to hear on the air. It's when we are dealing with opposing a Biden administration policy. It won't just be the ACLJ statement on it, Jay Sekulow and Jordan Sekulow statement, or our experts, which has done tremendous work in the past. But now we can add the names of the former Secretary of State, the last person to hold that position until the Biden administration, the former acting director of national intelligence and ambassador to Germany, a former attorney general. When these issues arise that are important, and I think with this specific appointment, I think we have increased our ability to talk about national security, but also intel.
Yeah,
intel, which this is a newer world for us because we lived it under Mueller.
Right.
What intel and how it can be misused.
Oh boy.
And so there is a difference between national security and intelligence. Intelligence goes with national security, but it's a big portion of it. And with adding now Mike Pompeo, who was the CIA director before he was Secretary of State, he was leading the CIA, and with Rick Grinnell together. I mean, it's added a whole new area of practice, really, for the ACLJ.
Yeah.
We were living it as the president's private attorneys through Mueller and the Intel
Look
world.
at the first case that we filed this year.
Yes, it's about Intel.
Right. So
it's Swalwell
it
and China and the China influence. And if you listen to the broadcast today, you know, it is, I don't like using words like Cold War again. And I don't, I think that but the idea that the former Secretary of State said that they're at a 9 or a 10 threat level to the U.S. that China poses.
Yeah.
And it's a different kind of threat than maybe military, but it could be, a threat like, hey, we've had a pandemic for over a year that's brought our economy almost to its knees a couple of times. It's certainly a lot of people it has. We can't get these relief bills through, and it's still not, we're still trying to get vaccines out. We're still trying to get back to what is normal. We know they're responsible in some way for it, whether intentionally or unintentional. And then you have the economic fighting, the diplomatic fighting. So I think, it shifts to our thinking that it's not always about the Islamic State. So certainly they pose problems as well, especially Iran. But it's also, it's broadening out your ability to understand these larger three-dimensional issues where we economically rely on China. We do everybody does business with China. Everybody look at what you bought at the store and see where it was made.
Right.
But also the way that they want to be the world superpower. They don't want the U.S. to be the superpower.
That's what Secretary Pompeo was talking about. And, I'm corrected here because Rick Grinnell served both as an ambassador and as a member of the cabinet. But Mike Pompeo was both the Secretary of State and the director of the CIA. So he held two cabinet positions in the President Trump's administration. So to underscore what Jordan's saying on a substance, you're going to benefit from the knowledge that he can share with us. And that's going to be significant. And we're excited about that. It's going to be a tremendous regular part of our panels at the ACLJ and our secular broadcast. However, there's another aspect of this, and that is the substantive work that is done every day, day in and day out, by the ACLJ. And to have as a resource Rick Grinnell, same thing was true with John Ashcroft, Mike Pompeo, and others, but especially though Mike Pompeo and Rick Grinnell, to have their knowledge on intelligence, which, like Jordan said, we became experts in intelligence because we handled the Mueller investigation. So there's not many lawyers that have been through a special counsel investigation on international intelligence gathering and have come out the other side of it. And we did. We were able to beat back Bob Mueller. But to have the information now and the expertise of Mike Pompeo and Rick and others is just tremendous.
And also their Rolodexes, their contacts, their ability to reach out if we need someone to reach out all around the world into known actors and actors who are more, shadowy behind the scenes in the intelligence world. We now have that resource at the ACLJ. Now, let me tell you, folks, it's all because of your support.
Yeah, I want to tell you something. I'm underscoring what Jordan said. The support that you've given the ACLJ over this last year especially, with a pandemic, was breathtaking. Now, we know it was God. We have no doubt about that. But God uses people, and you all have been incredibly generous. And this year is off to a huge start as well. And what we thought was, how do we take those resources and best utilize them? And to best utilize them, we were able to retain for the ACLJ, for the broadcast, but also in our legal work, our new senior counsel for global affairs, former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. Because of your support of the ACLJ, that is possible and has actually happened.
This is a critical time at the ACLJ to support our work financially. This is a matching challenge month, and I know that you've heard me say that before if you're a regular listener to the broadcast or you watch the broadcast. But let me just tell people who are thinking about making a financial contribution to the ACLJ and to the work that we do, where that goes. Well, obviously to do this broadcast every day, to get this out, costs resources. But of course, most of our resources go to fighting the battles. Of course, using our broadcast is important to that, but it's fighting the battles in courts. It's fighting the battles in Congress. It's fighting the battles in international courts. So all of our international work that we do all over the world for religious liberty, for freedom of speech, protecting your constitutional rights. And again, at a time when we believe the ACLJ is needed now more than ever. So in a Matching Challenge month, we have a group of donors that is ready to match every donation that comes through. You double the impact your donation. Donate online today at aclj.org.